Hi, this is Teresa Martin from Lower Cape TV. And today we're here for this episode of Legislative Update. And with me is State Senator Julian Cyr.
Hey, Teresa. How are you?
Good. Happy summer. Happy
Thank
July.
you.
Yeah. It's great to see you here. And I know for you guys, this is a pretty crazy time of year.
Yeah, we've been pretty busy. We're recording this actually. The Senate was in debate last night, just shy of midnight. And then on the drive back to the Cape, Stop by the studios here in Orleans. So this is really the busiest we've been since, this is the busiest in the 2-year session. There's a 2-year legislative session in Massachusetts, and formal sessions, right, where we debate substantive matters, where we have work on substantive policy. That all ends on July 31st. So we've got quite a hefty agenda. There's a bit of a penchant, maybe a bad penchant in the legislature to sort of put things to the last moment. But lots of good things in the queue. But it's very, very busy. Late nights, lots of good work. But on some things, hopefully we are going to deliver. They're going to make a difference for Cape Codders and for Islanders.
I know you've got 3 buckets of really heavy, intense topics, right? Housing. We'll talk about that a lot. And climate and economic development. I mean, these are really critical things for us here in the Cape. Which one are you most engaged with at this moment?
I mean, the housing has been, really the issue we've been engaged on. When I think of when I first ran for the seat in 2016, right? The challenge that so many of us face is that Cape Codders and Islanders in my generation really struggle to make a life here, right? The cost of housing has just risen astronomically. And in the 8 years that I've been state senator, we've seen, I think a 97% increase in median home prices here in Barnstable County. It's even worse on the islands. Really any person you talk to here, who's in the business of running things, right? Whether it be, our healthcare system and hospitals and health centers, our schools, our town administrators, anyone running an organization, right? They really struggle to find and to recruit workforce because people can't afford to live here, right? We have an out of whack real estate market that's really just geared towards second, third, fourth homes for people, investment properties. So this has been kind of my number one priority, throughout my tenure. Fortunately, with Governor Healy and Lieutenant Governor Driscoll, they put housing sort of squarely on the table, filed a bill called the Affordable Homes Act, which does a whole host of sort of good things around investing in housing production and a series of reforms. The House took up that bill in early June. 2 weeks later, which is record time in the legislature.
That's amazing.
Legislative time. The Senate took up our own Affordable Homes Act, and this is what we spent so much of June working on, pushing for a number of sort of initiatives, some disappointments in that and some big wins, and lots of things we can get into and talk about.
Yeah. What one are you most excited about?
Well, let me start with what I'm sort of most disappointed about, right? So I've been, and the Cape and Islands delegation with Sarah Peak and all of us have really been pulling in the same direction, lobbying for a local option transfer fee on luxury real estate transactions, right? This is a tool that when you look at places like Aspen and Vail, Colorado, or Truckee, California around Lake Tahoe, right? They have basically had to subsidize and create middle market, a year-round housing market for their communities, right? And how do they do that? They did that by putting a transfer fee on these multi-million-dollar real estate transactions. And that has really funded their housing initiatives in those communities, actually in Aspen and Vail. In Vail, Colorado, about a third of the housing units now are year-round deed restricted, reserved for year-round folks. So that's what we're trying to replicate here. The local option transfer fee provides the revenue source to do it. Nantucket and Provincetown have both filed transfer fees for over a decade. Now Truro, Wellfleet, Chatham filed transfer fees. Orleans town meeting voted in favor of support of it. And all 6 towns in Martha's Vineyard filed a sort of a joint home rule petition to do this. So the majority of towns in the Cape and Islands district desperately need and are asking for this transfer fee. Governor Healy put the transfer fee in the Affordable Homes Act. The House did not do it, and we came this close to doing it in the Senate. It really was among some of the toughest weeks I've sort of had in my tenure. We really sort of went to bat on this. I think the good news here is it seems like or the silver lining in this is not that this issue is sort of dead,
Right.
but that I think for this vehicle, for sort of a number of reasons that are going on, we didn't address it sort of in this vehicle. So I think our plan is to really come back and work really aggressively for this revenue tool. What essentially this will allow us to do is for places like Provincetown or Chatham or Nantucket, we'll be able to generate our own revenue to basically work towards solving this problem. And then we can deploy, these limited state resources sort of elsewhere across the state. So it's really something that makes sense. I think a slim majority of my colleagues support it, but we've got some more work to do, I think, to persuade others. And we'll be back. I mean, I'm coming back on this, and I'm not backing down until we get this done, because it just makes so much sense, especially for seasonal communities. Now, the Senate did not forget Cape Codders and Islanders in this bill, and there's a whole suite of packages that are targeted at what we've been calling seasonal communities, right? So communities that have a pretty hefty chunk of second homes or have this population swing. What we have here, right?
Right.
So the governor in her bill proposes a seasonal communities designation. The House continued that in their bill. In the Senate, we expand upon this quite significantly. We basically allow all communities who have the seasonal communities designation to access a whole toolkit of resources. We set aside a $50 million bucket of money for housing innovation in seasonal communities. And we basically enable a whole host of these tools and policies that housing advocates, the business community, and others here have been working to realize. Year-round deed restrictions, the ability for municipalities to provide housing to municipal workers, the ability for us to also support our creative economy and artists, requiring our towns to adopt tiny home zoning, to do merger lot provisions. This is something Truro and Oak Bluffs has done. And we enable these year-round housing trusts. When you look at what are the key ingredients around addressing housing in our communities, you need a revenue source, right? You got to pay for this. This is a big, expensive problem. Then you need to have a mechanism at the municipal level that can play in the housing market. These year-round housing trusts, which Nantucket has, Provincetown has, Chatham has a home rule to do this, basically allows the town to subsidize housing above area median income in some mechanism. And so that's enabled here in this too. So the seasonal communities designation is a big, big deal. I know we spent a lot of time on this show talking about wastewater and the Cape Cod and Islands Water Protection Fund, right? That was like the first thing we got done in my first term in 2018. Cape Cod Islands Water Protection Fund has been a remarkable success, right? The first few years of implementation, over $82 million in other people's money, subsidizing and helping us pay for the wastewater infrastructure we need here. Orleans was a huge beneficiary of this. Chatham as well with their debt service. Harwich is going to come online. Eastham's going to come online. Seasonal communities designation, this is at that level, right? So this is in the Senate bill. We're now working to reconcile the House and the Senate version to get a final bill to the governor's desk by July 31st. But, if we can get the seasonal communities designation with the $50 million authorization, with these policies and tools, it's going to be a real big shot in the arm to lower and outer Cape communities who just are grappling with, essentially an existential challenge that we face, right? Our communities are eroding a heck of a lot faster because of the fact that people can't afford to live here than anything that's going on with sea level rise or oceans or erosion. Every year, 1,000 Cape Codders who make under $100,000, right? 1,000 Cape Cod families are forced out or leaving because they can't afford to live here. So if we don't change course, we're the oldest county, I think, in the Northeast, this is a real catastrophic situation for us. We have to change course on housing. We have to do more at the local level. And what we did in the Senate is a big boost, a big shot in the arm to those efforts.
How does this fit in with what the Cape Cod Commission just released with its strategic plan?
So all of this is all part of efforts for us to really pivot it and look towards housing. I think in prior generations, there's a real focus on conservation. I think we did a good job there. And now we've really got to get into the business of housing. Frankly, we're going to have to figure out a way to subsidize housing for most all year-round people who don't yet own a home or going to inherit a home, right? Even me, right? I am the state senator. I am a well-compensated person, right? You can go check out my salary online. I've given up the hope of being able to afford, a home on the Outer Cape, right? In Truro and Provincetown and Wellfleet, the community I grew up in, where I live now, right? And look, I don't feel I'll be fine. I mean, my housing plan is I got to find a well-to-do, a husband who makes a good, healthy, fat six-figure salary. You know, one of those like tech bro remote jobs, right? But this is sort of the situation we're in, right?
Yeah.
And I think for people who are fortunate to own their homes, right? And that's happened because, of a whole host of a real sort of consensus around American policymaking from the post-war era until, pretty recently, right? How do you build middle-class wealth in this country? You build it through homeownership, building the equity in your home. Well, what happens when you have a whole generation that's effectively priced out from being even able to kind of get into that starter home? What we're trying to figure out and how to do is, how do we both build and also preserve year-round housing units that are dedicated to Cape Codders and Islanders who are living here year-round, who are staffing our towns or organizations who make this place run, right? The people who are serving the hordes of visitors and tourists that we got clogging our streets right now, right? And that's really the challenge. We've got a really good roadmap on how to do it. I talked about those towns, in the West who've already sort of pioneered this. And so, the Cape Cod Commission has been a great partner. The Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce has been a terrific partner. Really when this region speaks in unison, when we speak in one voice, we tend to have a pretty good track record of success. And that's what we're aiming for in housing.
Well, you can't separate it from the economic question, right? If you don't have year-round housing, you hollow out your community.
Well, that's why housing, when you want to talk about economic development, the vitality of our communities, you want to talk about healthcare, you want to talk about virtually any issue on Cape Cod, it all comes back to housing or also wastewater, right? And why is the wastewater important? One, we've got an obligation to steward our fragile environment, but also two, wastewater infrastructure allows you to build more densely, more efficiently, and to build year-round housing as well. So,
our choice has become a theme park or remain a vibrant community. I mean, it's kind of the two options, right?
Well, and look, I represent most all of the region, right? And I can tell you where this is going because I represent Nantucket, I represent Martha's Vineyard, I live in Provincetown, right? I grew up in Truro. I can tell you where this is going, right? And not changing course on this, just means that we are going to be a place that is a hollowed out year-round community. You're looking for any service, right? Whether it's someone to mow your lawn or a healthcare provider to help you with an issue, you can't find that. That problem is only getting worse and worse. And increasingly, we're relying on a workforce where you've got immigrant families who you got 15 people living in a 2-bedroom cottage. That's not right either, right? That's deeply unfair. So I'm really encouraged. I have seen how the tide is changing around sentiments in our town meetings and our towns. Increasingly towns are kind of pushing aside that not in my backyard tendency that like I've got mine and no one else can have this place. You look at what Provincetown's done. Chatham's been a real leader. Orleans. Right. Orleans is almost at 10% affordable units. So there's lots of good stuff. Our towns need more tools to basically solve the problem, and that's what Sarah Peak and I are trying to do.
I think it's exciting because it moves us away from this conversation that there's this workforce housing for some them. I mean, this is us, right? This is you. This is me.
This is you and me, right? These are our family members. These are our friends, the people we grew up with. If we're going to, it's us. It's totally us. And that's why I think you've seen, opinions sort of at town meeting and others sort of shift on this. But look, we've got a lot of work to do. This is just going to continue to remain my top priority. This is existential for us. If we don't solve this problem, we're not going to have a Cape Cod. Cape Cod in the future is not going to resemble, the place that we live in today.
We have to embrace our reputation. I've heard people call us stubborn Cape Codders. I believe that phrase has been used more than once. So it's like, no, you're not going to scrape us off. We are anchored here, right?
Yeah, but I think also people need to really, really look hard at this, right? If you're fortunate to own your home, you may not realize how impossibly difficult it is to not only come up with, a down payment and the financing to afford property now, but even just the ability to compete, right? when you're competing against someone who's coming in, purchasing their second, third, fourth home, cash only offers, no contingencies, that's really a disadvantage to year-round Cape Codders. So anyway, we're trying to solve all this. I'm going to be a dog with a bone on this issue, as I've been ever since since I got elected. And some disappointments. We're going to come back on transfer fee. A wise friend of mine who's been in the legislature a long time, often reminds me there's always another day on legislation. You got to play the long game. We do that. That wise friend's the Senate president. So hoping we are going to get some success there, and really proud of what we've done in the Senate for seasonal communities, and hoping we can bring it home.
I think it's important for all of Massachusetts, too, because the housing issues we deal with here, we're not the only part of the state.
We're sort of the canary of where it's going. Also, seasonal communities. This really benefits a lot of towns in the Berkshires, in the southern Berkshires, right? Places like Lenox, communities that are kind of struggling with some of the same kind of currents that we have. So I'm encouraged by the conversation on housing. I do think what's going to ultimately be required to solve this problem statewide, we need about 200,000 housing units to be built by the end of the decade. That's 6 years and counting. Housing production is slow. And too often, I think, restrictive zoning and land use policies at the local level really have been a barrier here. And so the Affordable Homes Act is funneling an unprecedented resources, right? Over $5 billion in state resources for housing. But I think we're also going to have to take a hard look at zoning. We're going to have to take a hard look at requirements for towns, making sure that towns are deploying, community preservation dollars for housing, are taking their local option room occupancy tax, putting that towards housing. Hopefully we'll get this transfer fee piece too. So more to come on this for sure.
Oh, it's exciting. Some of this stuff I feel like almost letting us go back to where we were a long time ago, right? Where it isn't like one nuclear family on 2 acres in one house. You look back at the history of the Cape, there were cottages and cottage colonies and multi.
Well, exactly. If you look at how Cape Cod was sort of built in the 19th century, even earlier, this is actually a dense little place, right?
Yes.
You didn't build some house way out on the bluff because you get blown away, right?
Crazy, right?
You look at the density of places like in Provincetown or here in downtown Orleans or in Chatham or you go into Hyannis or all the various sort of villages we have, Nantucket. These are dense places, actually. These are places that have actually always had multifamily zoning. We sort of shifted away from that in the last sort of 40, 50 years. Part of that was around trying to address wastewater, right? And basically saying, hey, look, we're not going to tap into sewering. That, by the way, in the 70s, the 80s, the feds basically would come and say, look, we'll pay for 90% of your sewer. A friend of mine serves in the water district in Harwich, and he found a letter from the federal government that's like, dear town of Harwich, we will subsidize 90% of the cost of your sewer. At the time, we didn't do it, right? We were sort of concerned about overdevelopment. Now, property taxpayers are facing, upwards of a $5 billion bill Cape-wide. And, we're going to have to figure a lot of the stuff out. But, really trying to correct the mistakes of the past and chart a more sustainable future.
So as the dust settles on these 3 big issues, how are we going to connect the dots here to what the state legislation is now enabling us to do?
So first we have to get it, we got to get it through a conference committee. It has to be signed into law, from the governor. I should mention, also in June, the Senate took up a major climate change bill, climate readiness bill. A lot of this is about modernizing our grid infrastructure, making sure that we can, really harness the energy we're going to need to have a clean electric grid. In that, by the way, I got some provisions around how do you expedite solar panel installation within historic districts. And then this broader economic development package, right, that we took up, which is something we do every sort of 2 years about how do you bring resources and support industries here in the state. So we're aiming to sort of tee all of this up, by or on July 31st.
Oh my gosh.
So it's going to be a busy month.
That is exciting. And then what? You get to go sleep for a month? You get to go sleep, go relax?
Yeah, we take some time off. For sure. August is a quieter month. I actually right after the end of the session, the National Conference of State Legislatures actually has their annual meeting. And actually next summer in 2025, Boston is going to be the host for the 50th anniversary of the National Conference of State Legislatures.
Pretty cool, actually.
And I got tapped by the Senate President to be the co-chair of the event. So I've got to go to Louisville, Kentucky in August, in the middle of August or early August for this, which is it's always a sacrifice when you have to leave the Cape in the summer. But yeah, we're going to do that. And then really, as we go into the fall, one, we're working on legislation, that we're going to work on and file,
right.
For the next session that comes up. And of course, this is an election year. So, you get out there and knock doors and have conversations and work hard, right? We've never taken this seat for granted, and we're not doing it again in 2024.
No, I think it's great to have that ability to really do really active, proactive listening. It's what shapes us, and I think that we've been lucky with our whole delegation across the Cape that people have been listeners. And I think I really appreciate that. So,
and we're going to have some new faces, right? We're going to have a new face representing the Lower and Outer Cape. Probably going to be Hadley Luddy, who's the only candidate right now, who's phenomenal, a tremendous housing advant.
We're going to have a new Sarah the horse.
We're all.
Oh my gosh!
I'm still in my mourning, my year-long mourning. Yes. I should have come in black, but and Sarah's just been a tremendous partner and a dear personal friend, and really leaves quite a legacy. We'll spend some time celebrating Sarah.
We will.
We'll have a new face as well, representing the islands and Falmouth, and then we're gonna have a new state senator for the Upper Cape and Plymouth. So a lot of change, but lots of good stuff, and it's just full steam ahead until July 31st, and then. We'll figure out the rest after that.
Well, that sounds absolutely great. I really appreciate you taking the time.
I'm glad we could squeeze it in. Yeah,
fit it in. And I'm really excited to see how these things finally roll out on the ground.
Me too. It's always among one of the more gratifying pieces of this work is to see legislation that you worked on and put into action, and then see that come to fruition, right? Property taxpayers in Orleans saved millions and millions and millions of dollars thanks to the Cape Cod and Islands Water Protection Fund, right? That's something that I wrote, that Sarah Peak wrote, right? It's helping people's lives. So a lot of gratitude in this work for sure. But busy few weeks left ahead, and then certainly going to enjoy some beach time as as someone who spent more years of my life than anything else waiting on tables, working in my family's restaurant. Having a few weeks in August off always feels like an unimaginable luxury. So
it'll be a Cape staycation, right?
There'll be a part of that. We got some campaign stuff, and then of course the Louisville trip.
Of course,
but certainly, it's just an honor to be able to represent this special place, and great to enjoy it too.
Well, thank you very much. Again, this is Teresa Martin with Lower Cape TV. Thank you for joining us with this episode of Legislative Update. And thank you again to State Senator Julian Cyr for joining us for an update on housing and climate and economic development, massive legislative programs that are in play right now. Thank you.